What's up, everybody? Welcome to Drop the Needle Records, coming at you with another video. This week, what I wanted to do is jump on the thread of 15 records that changed my life. But before I get started, if you would help the channel out, please like, comment, and subscribe down below. It really helps me. I love interacting with the community, and I hope that you ask me a bunch of questions, comment, and let me know what other videos you would like for me to put out. So let's get right to it. So the first record I would like to show is Michael Jackson, Thriller. This was the first tape I actually became obsessed with. I was very young. I couldn't get enough. I watched the videos on MTV, and I would rent. They had at our video store the making of Thriller. And I just remember watching it nonstop. And I actually remember when Michael would turn into a werewolf when I was real young. I'd get real scared of that. But I had so many copies of that tape. I would go through it nonstop. And to me, it's one of the best albums of all time. The next record after that really changed my life is, I don't have the exact song, but George Jones. I remember, this is the actual first song I can actually remember as a kid. I was really, really young. My parents had a turntable in our basement. My dad and my mom would put on White Lightning, and I just remember I would run and sprint around the couch downstairs, and I just really loved that song. Just kind of really brings back memories of music for me, and my dad and my mom, and a good time in my life. But yeah, that was definitely one of the first things I remember about music, and I definitely had to put that on my list. Next is Beastie Boys' License to Ill. This is the album that got me into hip hop. I knew this whole album front to back. I remember being in 4th grade and just singing along to almost every single song. I also have to show Ill Communication too, just because I was able to finally see them live on that tour, and it just kind of brought me full circle to see one of my favorite groups of all time on License to Ill for sure. Ill Communication still has one of the best music videos of all time. Sabotage is absolutely fantastic. I loved on that how they brought rock and rap together, and around that time you had a lot of that happening, especially like Rage Against the Machine and things like that too. Plus, it's, Beastie Boys to me just kind of really got me into one of my best genres of music. So License to Ill is definitely one of my favorite albums of all time, and it changed my life for sure. Next is Led Zeppelin 4. I can't remember exactly how old I was. I remember I was at my sister's house. She's much older than me. My sister is 16 years older than me. I might have been around 11 or 12 years old, and all I remember is hearing Black Dog for the first time, and my ears all of a sudden said to me, "What is that? That is like, what is that noise? What is that sound? That just sounds phenomenal." Jimmy Page on guitar, Robert Plant with his vocals. This really opened my eyes and my ears to classic rock. And it's really because of that moment I heard Black Dog for the very first time. Next, I have Elton John, Madman Across the Water. I remember my brother playing Madman Across the Water. He was in love with Elton John. My brother is like 19 years older than me as well. But he loved Elton John. When I was younger, I really didn't care at the time, but it had to be at the right moment, I guess, in my life. And he put this on, and I was like, what is that piano sound? That is something I really, really enjoy. My brother played this a lot, and I was indifferent, but what really brought me into this album was Tiny Dancer. Later on, because of Elton, I also fell in love with Tumbleweed Connection. I really loved that album as well, but this really brought me into a time in my life that I loved lyrics. I loved the sound of just a voice. I loved just hearing that piano sound. Kind of opened my ears to Billy Joel as well. Next one is Daft Punk Discovery. I remember hearing One More Time with my college roommate at the time, and this really opened my eyes to electronic music and techno. I just love the beat. I love the sounds that I was hearing. It really opened my ears to a different genre of music. Again, it's kind of a common theme, but they really transformed the electronic techno scene for sure. It got me into Chemical Brothers, Boards of Canada, Ronnie Size, Bad Boy Bill, Tiesto. Still love listening to that type of music for sure. But yeah, I really love Discovery for sure. Next up, I'm kind of doing a blend because all of these albums really changed my life. I'm going to show Nirvana, Smells Like Teen Spirit. I have to show Pearl Jam 10. I have to show Soundgarden, Super Unknown, Smashing Pumpkins, Siamese Dream, and Alice in Chains, Dirt. Grunge came around at the best point of my life, period. To me, I know the Beatles kind of changed music for what it is today, but grunge is what did it for me. It just came around at the greatest point of my life, and to me, it's transformed music even more today. All of those bands that I just mentioned, Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Smashing Pumpkins, if you had to, Soundgarden and Pearl Jam, if you had to ask me pick one, I couldn't. I just really couldn't, and it would change probably all the time. It was just the best time to be around in music. I'm really glad I was around in that scene for that. I wish I could have seen those bands in concert, seen Pearl Jam, which is absolutely great, but I kick myself for not being able to see them when I was in college, but for sure those albums definitely changed my life for sure. The next one is Tom Petty, Wildflowers. I was originally turned on to Tom Petty very, very young. I remember him on MTV dressed as the Mad Hatter for Don't Come Around Here No More. I loved that video as a kid. But when I was young, just certain songs would just open me. I was like, oh, there's Tom Petty again. My brother, again, he loved Tom Petty. He really, before this, got me into the Great Wide Open. That song's great. King's Highway is probably one of my favorite Tom Petty songs. But it wasn't until I heard this album that I was hooked. Front to back, this is my favorite Tom Petty album for sure. I was in college again, going through a rough patch in my life, and this album just resonated with me. You Don't Know How It Feels, You Wreck Me, Good to Be King, Honeybee, Cabin Down Below. It's just so damn good. I love every song on this album. I couldn't get enough of it. And to see him in concert on this tour was so great. Next album is Metallica and Injustice for All. I remember I was in junior high school. I went to junior high. I went to 7th and 8th grade where I was, and I was at my buddy's house at the time and saw the video One. And when I saw that video, I stopped dead in my tracks, and I just remember telling to myself, what is that sound that I'm hearing right now? At the time, I wasn't too much into hard rock here and there, like Motley Crue, Girls, 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 and stuff like that. But when this album came, it really turned me on to, you know, definitely at the time, very hard rock. Because of this album, went and got Master of Puppets, Ride the Lightning. This album for sure, one is actually, you know, one of my favorite Metallica songs because it's what brought me to Metallica. But on this album, Harvester of Sorrow, Eye of the Beholder, his whole album is just absolutely amazing to me. Next is Dr. Dre, The Chronic. To me, this whole album's a masterpiece. He was able to go on his own after Ice Cube did and Eazy-E, and he just hit this album out of the park. I went through easily 5 copies of this album easily. I can sing this album front to back. In high school and in college, I was playing it all the time. We got Snoop Dogg on this album, and it just takes me back to college days, parties. Anytime I hear any song off this album, it just takes me right back into that moment, hanging out with friends, hanging out, having a good time, talking and singing for sure. Next up is Kenny Rogers. This takes me back. My dad actually took me to my very first concert when I was 6 years old, and I got obsessed with Kenny Rogers. I still love Kenny Rogers today, and actually this is the Kenny that I remember right here. I love The Gambler, and I remember he was in A Circle of the Round. I remember him singing that. Crystal Gale was the opener. He was known for his duets and Islands in the Stream, all like that. Love me some Kenny. Anytime I hear Kenny Rogers, it takes me back right to that moment with my dad when I was 6, and I love every minute of it. Next up, I have Dave Matthews, Under the Table and Dreaming. If you follow me, you know that I love Dave Matthews, but I was in college at the time, and I heard Ants Marching, and I was hooked from that moment. That acoustic guitar sound, the snare drum, the violin, the sax had me from the very first moment I heard it. You have Best of What's Around on here, What Would You Say? All songs on here are good. I've heard these songs so many times. I've seen Dave in concert 44 times, plan to see him more, but because of this band, they introduced me to even more music. I got hooked onto the Grateful Dead, John Butler Trio, Jack Johnson, brought me into Neil Young, Sly and the Family Stone, Bob Dylan, and so many more. I can't say enough about this band. Again, if you listen to me, I could do videos till I stopped doing videos on Dave. But this album definitely changed my life. Next up, I have Van Halen, 1984. This album is what really got me into rock and roll. I remember hearing Jump, and I was, again, watching MTV, and I couldn't believe a guitar could be played like that. Hot for Teacher, Panama takes me back when I couldn't wait for MTV to play a certain video, and one of those was definitely Van Halen. This album is, to me, groundbreaking. I mean, Eddie Van Halen, to me, it is probably one of the best guitar players. Jimi Hendrix is right there for me, but Eddie Van Halen is absolutely fantastic. I hate this guy is no longer with us, but for sure, Van Halen, 1984. Next up, I have Slim Shady, Eminem. This came out in 1999, and at the time, I really didn't get into it, but the more I heard it, I loved it. And then in 2001, I met my wife, and she was obsessed with this album and with Eminem, and it got me more into it as well. my name is Guilty Conscience. And when I got to take my wife to see him live and I got to experience that with her, it made me love this album even more. And it's absolutely an experience I will never forget. I got to experience that with my wife, and for sure, this will always hold a special place in my heart. Finally, number 15, we got Graceland by Paul Simon. I just remember the video when this first came out, with You Can Call Me Al with Chevy Chase. That was great. But what hooked me on this album was Paul Simon live in Central Park. I remember watching that on HBO, and he played most of this album on there. But what really drew me to this album was Ladysmith Black Mambazo. They're an African group, and I heard them live on Central Park, and I was like, what is that I'm listening to? It opened my ears to music that I didn't even know really existed. I was a small kid in a country town in Indiana growing up, and this album really brought my ears even more to music. And I actually had Ladysmith Black Mambazo on tape, and my friends were like, who are you listening to? And I was like, it's Ladysmith Black Mambazo. And I loved it. I didn't care. But I bought this album, but as soon as I put this on, it just takes me back to that moment that I heard or watched Paul Simon live at Central Park, and takes me to a good point in my life. But let me now know down below what you think of the albums I showed. What would be your albums that would be, that would be on your list? I'd really like to know that. But I appreciate all of you hanging out. Again, please like, comment, and subscribe down below. But until we see each other again, peace.